So I think, as previously mentioned, we're waiting for the EU Commission to vote. All of the Commission have to vote with a yes. You can't have a single no, as it's already a regulation, and the regulation cannot be changed. So there is no amendment to the regulation that's proposed, because it's already a law within the EU. So under the way the Commission works, it isn't something that's going back to the Commission for change. That won't happen until 2028. So for now, we all have to live with the joy of what's coming in the next year. Everyone's belief is it will get voted through. 13 of the member states had already said yes, and they're the larger players. And there are still some member states that haven't actually put forward their own regulatory authorities. So they still haven't said who's going to be managing it in each of their regions. So they're also not ready, which is part of the reason as well. The delay was proposed. Obviously, everybody was waiting for these frequently asked questions, which have now been published. I'm not sure it's answered everyone's questions. I think it's just raised more questions, is always the concern. But I think everyone's now starting to get their head around it. Obviously, there was a massive change in that non-EU operators can enter into this system, which is also called traces, which is very confusing when we have FSC trace as well. So that system can be entered into if you are an exporter. What we're not sure about is who quite is the exporter, but that still doesn't give you responsibility under EUDR. So it is complicated. It's complicated being outside, watching something in. Obviously, we did that joyous thing 5 years ago. And it makes it more complicated being in the UK because we're outside, but really we're inside because of Ireland. So most of our retailers and publishers work across Ireland as a whole. So we need to have compliant product. We're not going to have the joy of being able to say these have to be and these don't. Like everybody, we don't know where the product goes. The publishers don't know where the product goes at the beginning. So we have to make everything compliant, which makes it more simple in some ways, but it puts a lot of responsibility back onto the supply chain. And publishers are not sure who they are. Most of our publishers in the UK do not have an EU presence, so they're sitting almost like we are as a printer in the UK. They're outside and they're trying to see who is the operator in this terminology they use, to understand where the responsibility sits and, more importantly, where the liability sits for non-EU product. No one wants to be published on the list saying they're not EUDR compliant, and Amazon, particularly in Europe, have been putting a lot of pressure on the supply chain to state that they will be EUDR compliant when the questions were still not answered. But Amazon are also not sure how they're going to be compliant, particularly. I'm rambling on, aren't I? No. Sorry. Particularly with concerns around the Onyx feed with book publishing. So the understanding is that Onyx will be updated with the geolocation file data. This is what publishers believe they're going to be doing. But obviously you have that mix of, but if Amazon produced the book for the ones that aren't produced by traditional book manufacturers, then how does that geolocation information get into the file? Obviously, that's the bit that's, Amazon are not quite sure what they're doing with that. So it just adds further complications into something that is already very difficult to understand.
Yeah,
that's absolutely. My summary.
Yeah. Just from a BMI perspective, one of the things we will look to do come the new year will be to put together an EUDR working group. So folks like Lisa and printers, as well as paper suppliers and other folks, once we get a little bit more information, the FAQs is like step one of the information that is out there that we will need. But we'll put together a working group to try to come up with whatever the right deliverable is, because we don't know whether it's a training, a video, a database. We don't know what it's going to look like, right? But we will work together with all interested parties to do something under the BMI umbrella, as this affects pretty much everybody in the room, right? So, with that being said, let's turn it to Jenna. So I think most people in here knows what FSC is, but some may not. So help us out. Give me the 30,000 foot view. What is FSC? What isn't FSC? And how does that kind of affect what's going on here?
So I will get to EDR eventually, but just the 30,000 foot view. So FSC stands for Forest Stewardship Council. And in FSC, there's FSC International, which is the parent company, is located in Bonn, Germany. It was formed in 1992, I believe. We just celebrated, or 94. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary. And that was as a result of the Rio Summit. And that as a result of that UN summit, it was determined that governments were not going to be able to save forests, and it was going to be up to businesses. And so several businesses and, at the time, environmental organizations and other interested parties all got together and formed FSC. So in FSC International, there is a board there, and that's made up of representatives from member groups. The member groups are social, environmental, and economic. And each group has a 33% share. Everyone's vote is the same, and everyone has to vote to change requirements. I work for FSC US. So in the FSC structure, a country or a region can have an FSC office. An FSC office has to have a member group. So we also have a US member group. Please join. We have a U.S. board, which tells us what to do. And then our job is to represent U.S. stakeholders and take their concerns to FSC International, especially when it comes time to writing requirements. So that's FSC as an organization. Now, we are a forest certification system or scheme. We do not actually do audits. There is an independent third party called certification bodies. So for clients who want to become FSC certified, they can certify in one of three different ways. So you can certify a forest, so that's the landowner or the management company. Those are called forest management audits, and they are managed by the FM standard. Chain of custody is every step that a tree goes through from being chopped down until a finished product. Every time there's a change in ownership, the entity must be FSC certified. That's called chain of custody, and that's what I work with. I'm the subject matter expert for chain of custody in the U.S. and trademarks. So chain of custody. And then we also have what's called promotional licensing. And you might start hearing more of this. We didn't really promote it much until much of the last couple of years. So promotional licensing is for companies that are not FSC certified. It's for end of the chain of supply chain, primarily brand and retailers that want to talk about FSC certification. Because statements are being made about FSC, and FSC is a trademark, we need to control what's being said to make sure that we can back up the statements being made. So for an entity like a Target or a Walmart, they sign a license, a legal agreement with FSC US, and anytime they use the trademark, they're supposed to get that approved by us. Whereas certificate holders work with a certification body, and the certification body manages their contracts, does their audits, takes their pay, does all of that, and approves the trademarks. So that's a little bit different. The other thing that has to happen with a promotional license holder, and you've probably been seeing this out in the field, is it has to be a finished and labeled product. And I say label, I mean it has an FSC trademark on it, not the branding information. And if a company requests use of the FSC trademark, they don't need to be certified. That's the way the system is set up, and most companies are not. Now, if they want to talk about the use of a product that is made as, constructed as, manufactured as certified, they can't sell it as certified because they are not certified, but they're marketing a product that was produced as certified. That is where the promotional licensing comes in. And I've been getting calls from certificate holders going, I don't understand this. So that's it, 50,000 foot view. So that's FSC. That's who we are. That's what our structure. And I'll turn it back over to Matt.
Okay. Well, in EUDR doesn't have any certifications, right? And there's the FSC stuff. There's ISO. Bookchain Project is trying to get people under their umbrella. I don't know if we would call that a certification but they're grading things. So for EUDR, what does that look like right now? Where do you think that's going? Jenna, go ahead.
So for FSC, we have decided that is very important to us as an organization. Most of the certificate holders that are certified already meet a large portion of all the requirements. So it is how can we take our certification to the next level and meet EUDR requirements. In the last year, FSC spent a lot of time and money in developing new tools that are supposed to help ease stakeholders. And when I say stakeholders, I mean certificate holders or promotional license holders. Anyone can use the tools, but to actually get into the system and be part of what I'm going to call FSC Trace, it was blockchain, to use those tools and be affiliated with the certification body and make those types of statements, they have to be certificate holders or license holders. So right now, FSC has tons of resources on this website. If you type in fsc.org, so that's the international website, and I cheat and just put it on the magnifying glass and search EUDR. That will take you to the FSC EUDR journey. There are recorded webinars, there are templates, there's a step-by-step guide, there's risk assessments, there's all types of things. And I say risk assessments, I should say templates, because the U.S. risk assessment has not been done yet. But there are more things than you think you're going to need at this time. Also, this website takes you to the actual legislation, which was written by the EU. It is not FSC. So when people yell at us, we are conforming to the EU regulation. So there's the EUDR journey. There's what do you do for your due diligence. This is what the risk assessment will look like. There's a regulatory module for companies that really want to get into the nitty gritty and make sure that they are as compliant as they can be. So when this rolls out at 100%, they're all ready to go. They've been beta testing and doing early adopter programs to test out these databases. Right now, we're working with the interoperability with the EU, what are they called? Yeah, the ones that are going to be doing the approvals in each country. Yes, the competent authorities. That's who they are. Competent. So the competent authorities and the EU have to roll out this is how you're going to make your due diligence statement. This is how you're going to enter your information into our system. This is how it's going to be approved. And that's the piece we're working on right now, is getting our database to link with their database, and they all play nice in the sandbox. It is a work in progress, as I'm sure you're all aware, as the rules keep changing slightly and the deadlines change. Our goal is to have our tools ready to go by January. Are they all going to be there? No, but that's the goal. The big thing for the U.S. is going to be the risk assessment, because that will take the place of the actual U.S. controlled wood risk assessment. That contract was just let last week. The contractor has already stated they're not going to make the June deadline, but they're going to be pretty close. So they're expecting this to be published in July. That's probably way out of the scope of most of you guys as publishers. But depending on where your supply chain goes, it's information that you are going to have to relay down to earlier in your supply chain.
Okay. I think I'm changing my title to competent executive directors. That's going to be my. All right. Well, it's a lot of EUDR, and we've got a lot more coming, and the next 12 months will be interesting. So, Lisa, besides EUDR, what's happening in Europe that might affect North American printers and the North American book market? Because stuff tends to start over there and make its way over yonder, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a raft of legislation that's coming under the green standards that exist, and particularly the Commission President. That is particularly what she stood on, is bringing through and making the EU definitely a force to be reckoned with when it comes to regulation. So I feel like I work in IT at the moment, or everything is acronyms. So there's EUDR sort of got sidelined once it got proposed to push back. So then everyone realised, there's another regulation that comes into force in just over a month. So on the 13th of December is the GPSR. So that's the General Product Safety Regulation. We're pleased to know there'll be nobody in this room that's responsible for that. That is all sits with our publishers. And they have to have an authorised representative in the EU to state that their books are safe. Obviously, we know we work with quite a safe product, but you have to have done a risk assessment. Again, this sits on the publishers. It's not very well known. We're just starting to pick up with it in the UK now with our publishers, now that everyone's got a bit more headspace. So there's that joyous one which comes in, and then we also have the French regulation that comes in for mineral oil-free products from 2025. So 1st of January that hits, and that's to have no mineral oils within the inks on any publication that goes into France, which makes it ever more complex in that when you start having different regions having different requirements. So it's not an EU requirement, but it is a French requirement. So that's impacting our facilities in France, but it's also impacting our German, Spanish and UK facilities because we all export into France. So again, another question from publishers, are we compliant? And as we all know, particularly in cold set products and heat set, it's an additional ask to bring materials into the market that are not stable yet for those products. So we're just working with our suppliers on that to ensure that we can state that we're compliant. And then you have the ones which were mentioned earlier from Macmillan. So there's ones where you'll be starting to get questions asked from any of your EU publishers that will be doing what's called CSRD. So this is a reporting directive, and this is the one that's 1,000 pages, untold questions, but it's a lot around supply chain. Where do materials come from? So it's the constant questioning, which I know has been picked up by a number of people in the room. It's the question for information from everybody in a different format for everybody, for a different reporting period for everybody. Just adds, I think, a lot for information gathering. Particularly because it's not a clear directive for people outside of the EU. It's just an information requirement, and it's on their whole supply chain. It's picking up with large producers first, so it's the larger listed companies for the first year. Second year, it's large businesses. Then after that, it falls down to SMEs.
Okay,
I'm full of joy.
Yes, fantastic. So Jenna, are there things that the printers should be asking of the paper mills, the merchants, whether it's EUDR related or anything related, that they need to be knowing right now about where things are going?
So one of our issues right now, and we're starting to see more and more of it, is when the logger or the pulper makes the product, they don't necessarily know where the final market's going to be. So they think they don't know anything about EUDR and they don't really care. And then it gets to the publisher, it gets to the bookseller, somebody's selling into the EU. And the EU then says, go back down your supply chain and tell us where this tree came from. So material that is from an FSC certified forest, the geolocation information is there. as is all the other requirements. Basically, for us, it's the geolocation, time of harvest, species, and then who the contract's between, so the buyer and the seller. Fine and dandy. We don't have an issue with that. So the end of the supply chain can go back to the front of the supply chain and says that this was FSC 100% material. Tell us where it came from. All right, here it is. Here's our geolocation. We can enter it into the EU database. Where we're going to run into issues is what's called controlled wood. So that is virgin pulp produced in US or Canada that can be brought in and mixed with material from a certified forest. Because there is not enough certified forest material in the marketplace, controlled wood happens quite frequently in the US. So virgin material can be brought in if it's demonstrated as low risk for 5 key variables. So it has to be legally sourced, there has to be worker protections, laws, protections enforced, cannot come from an area of conversion, cannot come from an area of high-risk conservation value areas, and cannot be a GMO. So for us in the U.S., if you can demonstrate that your product is low risk for those things, you can bring it into our supply chain and mix it with material from an FSC certified forest. Now, the problem is we know where the material is located on a spatial location, but we do not know point of origin. And finding out point of origin is going to be problematic. This is one of the things we're working with some other organizations to push. It's my understanding, I'm not an EUDR expert, that the risk is not tied in with geolocation and the specificity of that geolocated point. So, for example, we can get down to a plat map or a county or a region, but we cannot say that tree came from that forest. And because of antitrust laws and because of if a log moves through a concentration yard, it typically loses that information. They know it came from southern Pennsylvania, but they don't know exactly which forest. Figuring out how to geolocate all that information is going to be a sticky wicket in the U.S. We're going to be putting a lot of our eggs in the new risk assessment basket, and it's really going to depend on a lot of that, is if we can convince the EU to let us have a little bit bigger area for geolocation. So I see that as going to be a really big issue. We don't know how we're going to solve it yet. For the products that we are developing, blockchain it's now called FSC Trace, not to mix it up with the Tracy's. That will help, but we still run into the ownership problem with once the tree has been chopped down, who has those first stages of ownership before it gets to the pulper? And does the pulper know exactly where it came from? And then can they convey that information up and down the supply chain? So we're not out of the woods, but that's why I still have a job. But we are trying to address what we see as an issue. Some of the others creating tools, AHEC and the American Hardwood, I don't remember what the E stands for, Council. They have a proposal out on geolocation, and some of the other companies have just said, you know what, you're going to have to figure out geolocation on your own. So just know that as a publisher, if you have to go back and figure out your supply chain, if your pulper does not know the exact geolocation, that's going to be an issue for you.
Okay. Well, Lisa, you kind of, I think, just mentioned it a minute ago, but before, I don't know, maybe before August, when people really started, oh, wow, EUDR actually is going to happen at first. Before that, everybody was concerned. I was getting a lot of emails about, hey, publishers are sending us these surveys around sustainability, and some were 10 questions, some were 10 pages of questions, and it was kind of all over the map. I think that got forgot about for a quick minute while EUDR was burning people's hair. But what is it like now? I mean, some of the surveys you mentioned a second ago, I don't know if those were official regulations that people had to do versus what are you seeing publishers, I guess, in Europe asking for at this point?
So it's the same information. I don't think anything's necessarily changed. I think probably printers are getting, and mills are getting a little bit better in having some of the information. So it does feel that the raft of stuff we were getting, we're just getting it again, but from the same people. So it's something we're more familiar with. We took a stance a couple of years ago now that we would stop joining platforms that publishers asked us to, because it's yet another platform you need to join, yet another survey you need to complete, and some more audits or requirements that you need to then measure and move forward with. So we've been fairly successful in that. We've not joined anymore. And it's enabling us to try and pull together to be able to start improvement journeys rather than just constantly answering surveys. I think that regulations, so some of those ones previously mentioned are regulations, so they become, you must be compliant if our publisher is going to continue to sell books into those regions. So we have to complete that information for them. But what we are finding is that people like BookChain particularly have definitely started to have a little bit more teeth to them. The publishers pay for that platform. It's one we don't actually pay to join, which is unusual. And I think what we're finding in that is that they're starting to, they've got more weight to them, I think, would be, we're starting to see papers being delisted. Mills are under a lot of pressure to keep up the information, to keep it, as up to date as possible. And we are starting to have publishers contact us when our papers get delisted, then it's contacting the mill too. So it's just those sorts of things are something that didn't happen 3 or 4 years ago at all. All of the chemicals that we have on BookChain, they only have a certain period of time that we're allowed to keep them on. Then we have to have them reviewed to make sure that that information's current and up to date, which helps with some of the safety requirements, I think, as we go into 2025. But it's another thing that we are all having to join and keep up to date. But I think it will start to have some benefits, I think, to for our publishers. And actually for the printers and mills that are on there, because you do get a grading. And what we're not seeing yet is that anyone who's not on there doesn't get any work, but we live in hope.
Well, and so you folks know I've been in contact with the BookChain folks, and we have pretty regular dialogue. And I know there was one or two members had sent me emails saying they had a publisher who needed them, was using the BookChain paper grades to decide what to use, and a grade that manufacturer used wasn't on there. So I reached out. It was one of our member companies, of course, and said, okay, guys, you got to give this information. Otherwise, you have a printer who can't use your paper. And I think they got it done within a couple days and resolved. So we're trying to stay on top of that as BMI. So if any of you run into any issues with a publisher asking for BookChain information or saying that your paper's not there, bring it up with me. That way I can grab the necessary parties and make sure that everybody's up to date on that, just to throw that out there. So Jenna, we talked about a few different things but with FSC, but what other programs does FSC offer that maybe we're not familiar with? You said something about group eligibility when you and I were talking before. What is that?
So we went through a year-long process with our group managers in the U.S. to change the threshold to join a group. So a group is similar to a single certification, except that there is a group manager. That group manager manages as many unrelated certificate holders as they can handle. Everyone uses that same certification number. So this is primarily for small companies, small businesses. The original threshold was $5 million. We've now changed it to $10 million of forest product annual turnover, or 25 or less full-time equivalent employees. So if your company falls under that level, or if you know a company that does, they're now eligible for group certification. So they don't have to maintain their own certificate. It allows newer companies, it's into the marketplace easier. The compliance manager can explain what to do. They're not acting as a certification body, so they can actually say, do this, do that, whereas certification bodies can only tell you if you are or are not in conformance. They do your internal audits. They manage, they give you a set of procedures and say, here's the procedures, follow these. We'll train you once a year. All of that is typically included in their fee, and their fee is typically less than maintaining your own certification. So that is a positive benefit. We list on our website, so the us.fsc.org, different group managers in the U.S. There's some that are limited by states, some limited by products, but there's I think it's in green, but basically there's a printer group certification for small printers. So just know that that's an option. It can be cheaper. The annual administrative fee is cheaper for group members than for single certificate holders or multi-sites. I'm trying to think what else we have coming up. We have several technology advances coming up. So for example, right now, there's something called the FSC Marketing Toolkit. It's not user-friendly. I've tried to figure it out, and I can't do it, and that's my day job. And then if you're familiar with the label portal, that's not the most friendly tool either. So those two things are being combined. They're going to become, it's all of our name changes, the Branding Hub, FSC Brand Hub. It's going to be a lot more. I've seen some of the previews, a lot more user-friendly, a lot more, you'll have a lot more flexibility in adjusting the trademarks, that whether it's language, size, color, then the marketing toolkit information will be there. So those are resources. So this is what IKEA is doing in the marketplace. This is what Tesoro is doing in the marketplace. You can see what other companies are doing, what they share publicly. The FSC Watch Tool, Certificate Watch Database, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. Basically, it allows you to enter your supplier certificate information, and if that information changes, you get an email. So rather than, if you're a certificate holder, you're required to make sure that that information is up to date at the time of your audit. And that can be a real pain if you have several hundred suppliers, to check and make sure that everyone's certificates are valid and that they still sell these products, they haven't changed certification bodies, etc. So that, I've been told, will be, for some reason it was broken or stopped functioning as of the last tech upgrade. So in the new database, it's not going to be one of the first things rolled out, but it's going to be like the second or third thing, because this is highly important to those who have hundreds of suppliers, to keep them up to date. And that's also going to be managed through the Brand Hub.
All right. Well, I'm going to open it up to questions. The roving microphone. There we go.
And while he's running,
I got to pull double duty. I'm up on the podium and walking. So
while he's running around, I want to raise 2 points. So this is the first year in several years that all of our requirements are coming up for consultation and revision. You might have seen, there's on the website, you can sign up if you're an interested party. You'll get emails about this. So right now, the chain of custody standard, the multi-site, the reclaimed, and the trademark standard are all up for revision. It is important, especially if you're a certificate holder, to comment on those. You'll see in the comment reports, FSC International is required to take all of those and record them. How they choose to address them is up to them. They typically group them by like or unlike. But you'll see that sometimes we have 8 respondents in the U.S., and that is guiding what's happening on the international level. And so whenever I'm sitting here screaming, going, all of our certificate holders are saying this is not possible, this is onerous. This is costing too much money. And FSC International is going, well, we are not hearing this from the field. So if you have any questions or concerns, please respond to these. Pay attention. You don't have to answer every question. They typically have a, is there anything else, or another question at the very end. You can drop it all right there in that one question and skip everything else. But please, please, please respond to those. And then the other thing, and I haven't quite figured out exactly why this is other than they are a publishing company, is the Amazon Climate Pledge Friendly badge. This is an Amazon product that bumps products up in their algorithm. So if you have an FSC certified product and you're selling it on Amazon, you get bumped up in their algorithm and you get the Climate Pledge Friendly badge. But because Amazon makes the rules, they said no books. Now, if enough people were raised to stink about it, maybe they would allow books. But just saying that this is a crowd, it's a free thing. I don't know how many of you actually do sell on Amazon, but it is something that's out there and available. And if you work with Amazon, you can just say, it sure would be nice if our books could be recognized. So, okay.
Okay, so I'll take the first question to you. First of all, I sat in on your call about revisions a couple weeks ago. Excellent call. So I encourage other people to do that. Secondly, with the brand, brand hub, will all of the trademark historical information that we have roll into the new one?
It should.
Okay.
Because your certification bodies manage all that information, and that's, to my knowledge, is not going to be centralized.
Okay.
It will branch, so somehow there will be access to it. But yes, it should, all historical information should.
Just checking to see if I needed to download everything from it for historical information. Okay. Thank you.
But you can always ask your certification body just to be sure.
Thank you, guys. I got a question for both of you. So, Lisa, you talked about the EUDR cannot be changed till 2028, but can it be clarified? Because there are some confusing things involved there.
There is no update on any further FAQs being published. They believe they've responded to all the FAQs. It now comes down to the individual regions. So, and this is the problem when we're outside. If we were operating in France, we do operate in France, but we would be contacting the French authority to understand their take and making sure that we complied with the French authorities' requirements. And that's why, because each of the competent authorities is reading the regulation and will apply it into their own law. That's how it works in the EU. So each of those regions are putting it into law, and they will have then the ability for their competent authority to say what is and isn't compliant. And therefore then you've got 27, possibly 28 states all giving you potentially different information. They're not stating they're going to give any further information.
So in other words, clear as mud is what you just said.
Absolutely.
Okay, the other question I have, I guess either one can answer, but our mill uses residual chips from sawmills, not whole log chipping. So you can, and they are geo-tracked. We buy our chips from warehouses, and they've been geo-tracking for decades. The question is, you're going to get a bunch of chips from several logs, that probably a lot more than the 10 square meters. So how does that fit into this thing? Because it's going to be difficult. I mean, we do, I know we do all the right things, and yet here we are going to be hamstrung because of the area. So maybe a little comment there.
So I have to stop and think. Weyerhaeuser owns their own forest, right? So if their forests are certified, that the BMU, the Forest Management Unit, the FMU, that is the right size. That works. We don't have, so if it comes from an FSC certified forest, to everything we have been told so far is that will meet the geolocation requirement. It is when there's virgin material that's not from an FMU that we run into issues. And we don't know right now.
Okay, in the Pacific Northwest, there's I don't know if there's any FSC certified forests because it is onerous for public land or private landowners. So we do have fall under the controlled wood, which we are certified there. So that, I guess that is the question. You got certified wood. We know where they came from because they are geotracked, but it doesn't qualify under FSC type thing. But would that work? We don't know yet.
Don't know. However, we are making a big concerted push in the Pacific Northwest to get more certified forests and working on the public land side.
Okay. So you're changing some regulations, perhaps.
Yes.
That's why I got a comment, right? Okay. Yep. Sorry. Charlie's in the back.
So I think this question, Jenna, is probably for you, and it may be broader than you want to get into. At the moment, and I think Lisa mentioned it before, there are a multitude of these third-party validation, certification organizations that are out there. I think in our organization today, we're up to about 15. To Lisa's point, Bookchain doesn't charge us. Everybody else does. They are all different. They are at all different levels of interest, of detail, etc. Has there been any thought given, and with FSC kind of at the top of the pile of these certification organizations, have you guys thought about some level of consolidation, some level of consistency? Because everything is different. The people we give these things to, or God forbid, I have to fill it out. It's crazy. So if you can answer, please answer. If not, say, nah, you're out of luck.
It's a mixed answer. So FSC has cautiously said they are not going to bill you for anything. However, the kicker is, for example, if you choose to use the regulatory module, that is audited by a certification body. So while FSC does not charge you to use any of their tools, you are going to have to pay extra money for an audit. The FSC Trace blockchain, we have been told, is supposed to be free for all certificate holders and promotional license holders. As far as consolidation, we're definitely keeping our eye to see what other companies are doing to see how if anyone can crack this nut on exact point of origin. But that's about as far, I believe, as we've gone on consolidation. But we're definitely open to suggestions. So please bring your comments forward, and we also pay attention to them and discuss them internally about what we can do better.
Okay. Just a real quick comment to that. The Green Book Alliance, of which BMI is now a member, it's Book Industry Study Group in the US, it's BIC in the UK, BMI, BookNet Canada is at least trying, and Lisa, feel free to, back me up here, at least trying to get publishers to standardize their questions or their priorities. Yeah, so it met at Frankfurt. It'll meet again at London Book Fair on March 10th. There'll be ongoing initiatives between now and then, trying to get publishers at least to align on what their priorities would be. This isn't necessarily about EUDR, other regulations, but about some of these questionnaires. And to David Hetherington's point, how many microwaves do you have is really not relevant. Lisa, so CPI is at the forefront of this. You've been ahead, and the UK has been ahead. And as an organization, you designated a person and resources to tackle this. But a lot of organizations in the US particularly are a little bit behind, or maybe they don't have dedicated resources. How did the company come to decide that this is something you had to pay for? Do you see any willingness on publishers' part to help you pay for it? And then what made you decide to share it all? The incredible transparency that you've shown in the last several months of here's what we learned, here's what we know, here world, go and do with it what you will. What made you decide that this was important enough for you to both pay for and to share?
So I think the pay for part has come sort of, I suppose, just through a transition and from the top. So I think once sustainability is on the agenda of all companies, which it is, it's then when you start to align that with your financial goals. And that's when you then start to put a value to what it is in your business. And I think that most of our publishers believe that there is some golden goose somewhere at the end of sustainability that means we're going to save any of the paper that we waste, we're going to reduce our prices because we're going to have wind farms and, obviously that will come free. And all of those things, it's that we've done all of that in most of the supply chain. We've all cut our cloth accordingly. And we do things as efficiently as possible because we've had to save money because prices have been held or reduced. And it's a very competitive market. I think that a lot of businesses operate under ISO standards because that was a requirement of something back in the 90s and the early 2010s. And therefore, out of those auditing compliance things then becomes what's your sustainability policies? And I think with our company, it is very much as long as it's on the agenda of the board, then it's enabled us as a business to be able to say, okay, we need to now put a face to this. We need to be able to say, what are we doing as a business? And I think there's a responsibility when you're a large player to a little bit put your money where your mouth is, which is probably what we're doing. Do we have the ability to charge more? No. Do our publishers still go elsewhere? Yes. Whether that will change, you do see a slight sea change, I think, at the moment. I think there's definitely the transparency within the supply chain is absolutely key to all of this. This is the only way EUDR works, one of those regulations. But the CSRD they're asking for, it's the only way it works, is we all have to be very transparent. And those are the things I think that will allow us to be possibly, even if you don't get paid any more, that you may be able to justify why your price is slightly higher. So we do see it as a service. We do sell it as a service. And there was one particular, there's a really small printer near one of our plants. And they've just gone to a B Corp company, which is quite popular at the moment. One of our publishers become B Corp. It's very costly to do. But what they are seeing is they've seen a huge increase in their turnover. So I think if you can find like-minded businesses and like-minded publishers, I think there will be a value to it, but probably for a short period of time. Of course, then things go back to normal and then pricing becomes key and things level out. Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. Thank you sorry. Go ahead, Jenna.
So if anyone has any FSC, chain of custody, technical questions or anything, please find me. I also updated my bio with my email address. So if you think of it later or you have a colleague that's not attending and like, hey, I talked to the lady from FSC. And he's like, I got a question. Go ahead, shoot me an email. That's what I'm here for.
All right. Thank you, Jenna and Lisa. Thank you very much.